Okay, I think we're recording. So let's go over the climate data information that you can access in the visualization tool and talk about how you can compare that to your phenology data. So I am going to share my screen. Okay. Problems with another window that won't shut. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think I've got it now. All right. So yeah, I guess we can start off by just kind of talking about why you would want to compare climate data to your phenology data. But I think often, people wonder if they can start to see relationships that might be the kind of drivers of what phenology is happening on their plants. So you think about, when things are happening in the springtime, when you have that flush of leaves in the spring, or you have flowers coming out, does that have anything to do with the temperature from the previous season? Or maybe it's something even earlier than that. Or maybe, especially here in the Southwest, we might think about precipitation as being a really important climate driver of some of these phenological events. So because we realized that a lot of people want to know about that, we decided to start importing climate data into some of our tools so that we can make it easier for people to see that climate information alongside their phenology data. And as you know, we don't have people record climate information in Nature's Notebook. We made that decision early on that we really want to focus on the phenology part of your observations, and there are other organizations that do that kind of temperature and precipitation data collection really well. So one thing that came up on the call yesterday was there are other organizations out there if you'd like to record climate data. So one of those is CocoRAS. That's another organization that CocoRAS. I'm going to bring it up here.
Oh,
so
okay.
this is, you can actually order a rain gauge through this organization and have that set up at your site or your home, and actually log your reports of the amount of rain or snow and other locations that you get, and then have that kind of as another source of information alongside your phenology data.
Okay.
So the way that we decided to bring in the climate data, because we don't have our observers record that, is through another organization called DayMet. And this is funded through the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. But basically what they do is they pull from weather station data. So they're pulling from the kind of like CocoRAS kind of stations, rain logs, some of the NOAA cooperative weather stations, and they're pulling all that station data and then creating models to kind of extrapolate from those sometimes sparse, but single weather stations to make a full grid across the whole country that tells you different weather variables, and they list them out here. So things like daily maximum and minimum temperatures, precipitation, and some of these other things on this 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer scale. So there's a bunch of little pixels, little boxes on this gridded map that are tied to these locations, and they each have these different variables included. So we were able to access this information. And so once a year, usually in June when the data become available, we access the DayMet data and we pull them in to the Nature's Notebook database. And what we do is we actually do some of our own calculations and then tie that information to the location that your site is located at. So we match up the lat long of your Nature's Notebook site with whatever kilometer it falls into, kilometer grid from the DayMet data. So and instead of doing daily values, we feel like it's more useful if you're looking at phenology data to think about what happened in that season. So we actually calculate seasonal averages for things like the maximum temperature. So we're averaging out over the whole spring season, what was the average maximum temperature and what was the minimum temperature. And then we also give you the accumulated precipitation for that season as well. And so we bring all that in from DayMet once a year for the prior year. And so right now we've just gotten the 2020 climate data. So unfortunately, we don't have any 2021 climate data. We won't have those until next June because it takes until this year is finished and then they have processing time So it's a little bit lagged. So really the only comparisons you can make are the previous year. And you can't even do that until June of the following year. So if we go to the NPN website, the way we can see this data, there are two different places. One is the visualization tool. And so if you go to the visualization tool on the website, this is a landing page that has a bunch of information on it to kind of help you understand the tool. And so if you ever want to review on how to use the tool, you can watch this webinar recording, and that basically goes through step-by-step how to use all the different features in the tool. We're hoping eventually to break that out into shorter videos that focus on, the different visualizations. You can see a description of the different visualizations here. And then down here at the bottom, this is where you can see the information about the climate data and kind of summaries that describe what exactly you're looking at when you view it. So another thing I thought would be useful before we dive into looking at the climate data is to just revisit this idea of an onset. And so you might not be familiar with that, or maybe it doesn't sound too familiar, but have you heard that word before, onset?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, so if you think about when you record your phenology data in Nature's Notebook, it's asking you a bunch of yes or no questions. And so let's say you're observing a desert willow. And so you start going out at the beginning of the year and nothing's really happening on the tree. It doesn't have any leaves, it's bare, it's dormant. And so all of the questions get a no response. So you keep going out, and then as things start to happen, you record your first yes record, maybe for leaves first. And so that first yes record represents an onset. And that means it's, the phenological event is happening. It has started. And the important part in our data set is being able to look at that previous no record that you reported, and then when that first yes happened. And so if you are recording once a week, then we know that by looking at your data set, you have the no record last week and then the yes record this week. There's only a week span of time where there's an uncertainty there about when that thing happened. It could have happened yesterday, or it could have happened 6 days ago. But if you're only observing once a month, then we would have a month uncertainty. So that's why it's better, as things start happening in the springtime, or, times when it's really active, that you record more frequently. Because if you were recording every other day, that uncertainty would only be one day, it would be really precise. So this onset is that first yes record. And ideally it has a previous no that's kind of attached to it, but it doesn't have to. There are onsets in the database where no one recorded anything before that. There wasn't a no reported. So we really only have a first yes to go from. And so we don't really know if it was when that thing started or what the uncertainty is, but we do have a yes. So we know, at least we know that it was leaves on that day.
Okay.
Any questions about that? I know it's a little confusing.
No, I think I get it.
Okay. So another way we can look at this is actually, I don't know if you've seen this resource, but it's kind of the documentation of what the data look like and why we made certain decisions about what to include. So I can put this in the chat if you want to take a look at it at any point, but it's basically just a publication that describes the data format that we have for Nature's Notebook.
Okay, yeah, that would be interesting.
So this describes the different types of data that we offer, both in the visualization tool and in the Phenology observation portal. So the raw format of the data, which is a data set, a data file that has a bunch of rows, and each row is whether you said yes or no or question mark. That's like the most basic format, basically what the data sheet looks like. So it would have lots of data points kind of represented in the green here, where you said yes, and then a week later, a month later, you said yes, and then sometime later, yes again, on throughout the year.
Okay.
So that's just, the basic data format, raw form. And then we take it a couple steps further, and we started to offer summarized formats as well. And so this is where those onsets come in. So if you look at the individual phenometrics, so this is a summarized data format, we're taking this raw format and we're collapsing it down into when was the onset and when was the end. So we're really only looking at this first record of yes here.
Mhm.
And then we're ignoring all the stuff in the middle because it was just continuous yeses. And then we're giving you this last record too.
So the beginning and the end.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's if someone's, trying to do an analysis of when were desert willows in flower, they might not want to see all the yeses that you recorded throughout the spring. They just really care about that first yes and then that last yes. And they also would love to see that you had a no before that first yes and then a
Yeah.
no after. So they really can see that it was a defined data set.
Mhm.
And then the site phenometrics is another format where if you had 3 desert willow trees at your site, it's going to give you an average. So it's going to collapse down all these 3 into one row in the data file and tell you across all these 3 trees, this was the average first onset, and then this was the average end date.
Okay.
And then the magnitude phenometrics, that's actually what's behind the activity curves that you might have seen in the visualization tool. And those are the curves that really show, it allows you to see when the peaks happen and like how, if all the people across Tucson that are monitoring desert willows, when were they all saying yes to the trees? So it's even broadening it out even more and allowing you to see over, really ideally over a region, when is the majority of the yeses, when are those happening? So that's just kind of an overview of the different data types.
Okay.
But really what we're talking about today is we're using this onset information and looking at based on when the first yes was reported, can we link that to a climate driver to see if there's a relationship between when these onsets are happening. So I'm going back over to the landing page. This is the landing page for the visualization tool.
Okay.
And then this has a description of all the different things that you can compare that onset to that are a list of what we call, abiotic or independent variables. So you can look at things like latitude. So if you want to see whether like something for, say, red maples, where it occurs across the whole eastern United States, were the onsets earlier in the south than they were in the north, which you would think that would probably be the case. Longitude, that might be, for something like around the Great Lakes, you might think that maybe there's an effect of the Great Lakes and kind of changing the temperature, where it's a different temperature close to the water versus farther away. You might want to use the longitude for that to see if there's a difference in when plants were leafing out or flowering. You can look at elevation to see if maybe trees that are at lower elevation are leafing out or flowering earlier than those up higher. You can compare across years. So maybe there was a year like in 2012 and 2017 were like super early springs. You can see if there's something coming up where you can see that in the data by comparing a bunch of years to each other. And then we get into the climate variables. So the way that we group them is by the seasons, although they're not exactly the calendar seasons, where we don't use the equinox or the solstice dates. We actually just use months. So from the first to the end of the month. So fall actually is September to November. So September, October, November. Spring is going to be March to May. Oh, this is in here. This should say summer actually. Summer is June to August. And then winter is December to February.
Okay.
And so the one, I guess, a little bit tricky one is most of the onsets that you would care about are things like leaves and flowers and fruits. And most of those are happening in the first half of the year, sometimes into the fall a little bit. So for comparing and trying to say like, well, does the previous season's weather influence that? We don't really want to compare it to that fall of the same year because it might have happened later. Say you're looking at flowering that happens in the spring. You wouldn't want to look at the fall of that same year because it would happen after. So we look at the previous year's fall.
Okay.
And then the winter, because it overlaps from December to February, it is the December of the previous year plus January and February of the current year.
Okay.
And then the temperatures are, the same months that the precip data are, but for the maximum temperature, the average of that for that season, and then the minimum is the minimum average. And then we also have day length. That's just, would change as you go along each day consistently. And then accumulated precip is from the beginning of the year, so beginning January 1st.
So you can click on any one of these and they'll come up.
So yeah, let's go into now how you would see them. This is just a list and description of what these are, but the
Okay.
way you actually look at them is in the visualization tool. So we can
Okay.
go into there now. All right, so just again, another orientation to the visualization tool. The first page you see is the seasonal stories. These are ways to explore, how to use the tool, the kind of information that you can see. It provides kind of a tutorial on how to use the tool. So you can definitely revisit those. But if you want to just jump right into looking at specific species, you go to the Data Explorer there on the left. And then, so with the climate data, the only way that you can see the data are in the scatter plot visualization. You're not able to use the climate data in any of the other ones. So we pick scatter plot. And then we go to, we can add a boundary if we want. We don't have to. I'm going to skip that one here. It also asks you to define the years, and you can have up to 10 years. So I usually just change this to 2012, and then I get 2012 to 2021. Although I guess here, because we're looking at the climate data, we're not going to get anything from 2021. So we could just look at 2011 to 2020, and that will give us 10 years, including all the climate data up to the most recent, which is 2020.
Okay.
And then now we pick our species, and I think I'll keep going with the desert willow just so we can keep that. We type that in. Then we pick a phenophase. So what do we want to look at? Leaves or flowers?
Flowers.
Okay, let's look at open flowers. And really, these are the flowers or flower buds are overlapping with the open flowers, but sometimes there's a little bit more, I don't know, the data are a little bit higher quality with the open flowers because flower buds can sometimes be a little confusing. And so open flowers are so obvious that usually by the time the flowers open, you're pretty sure that that's what you're looking at. So it's I think a safe one to pick. We can make it a color. We can make it purple, pink, I guess that's pink. All right, so then now we have plotted on here, each of these dots represents an onset. So again, the onset is the first yes that was reported. And so this is going to default to having it's called a data precision filter here on the left panel here. And if you click on the eye, you can learn about what that is. But that's the thing that I was talking about, which is the prior no record before that onset or that first yes. And so, with someone who's looking at the data, they might want to make it more precise and say, only show me the onsets that have a preceding no within 30 days.
Okay.
So it's going to throw out any data point where you had an onset, a first yes, that didn't have any no prior. It's not going to show that on here. So if you want to turn it off, or you can only do that. Okay, we can go over that in a sec. You can make it a smaller amount of time, a shorter window. So if you want to be really precise, you could say, only show me the onsets where there was a preceding no within 7 days. And that's going to be, the most precise that we can offer you in the tool. So it's going to be probably the least amount of data points. So again, I was talking before about the different data types and how we summarize them. And so by default, you're going to look at the site phenometrics. So that is if you have multiple desert willow trees at a site, it's going to average them and give you 1 point. Okay. And so we can turn that off by clicking on this box here and tell it, I actually want to see every single tree as a point. Don't collapse them down and average them. Just give me every single tree that you can. And if you do that, then this allows you to say, okay, and I don't care about whether there was a no record. I want to see everything that had an onset, a first yes, even if there's not a prior no.
Okay.
If you want to make it more precise, you could say, actually, I want to see all the individual desert willow trees that had a prior no within 30 days. Maybe that's a little bit better.
Okay.
And so any questions on that?
No, not so far.
So if you click on one of these points or hover over, you can get more information about what that's showing you. So for this one, this is a tree that first had open flowers, and I don't know if we believe this, September 22nd of 2020. Maybe because last year was such a strange year. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
true, or
It bloomed in the fall too.
yeah, there's maybe a second round.
Mhm.
If we go up here, this was a tree that first had an onset on April 1st in 2018. We also can see the latitude and longitude of that site. And then we can keep going. And look, this one was a May 30th, 2013 onset there. So if we want to start looking at, comparing the onsets to the climate variables, then we would change this from latitude to something else. Right now, this is showing us on the y-axis, this is the onset day of year. So this is basically time. So this was, January 1st is down here at the bottom. And
Okay,
it goes all the way up to the end of the year, December 31st.
okay.
And then the latitude goes from the south here to the north on the right side. So what this is showing us is there a relationship between when something first bloomed versus how north it was. So if we want to fit a line, we could see, does this have any sort of relationship between it? And so this is saying that at more southern latitudes, the onset of open flowers was later in the year. And then as you go north, it's earlier in the year.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really makes sense. I don't think that's really a question we would ask for latitude, but
Yeah.
yeah, especially because the desert willow, if we think about the range, it's going to be probably, here up through Phoenix at least. And that's actually going down in elevation. So it's not really, a latitude question that we would probably ask for this species.
Yeah.
Kind of shows you that when you click the checkbox, you fit a line. And what the line is trying to do is it's trying to put some sort of a relationship. It's a simple linear regression. So it's trying to say like, okay, I have all these points. Is there a way I can fit them so that, these points kind of line up to a trend or a pattern in the data? And then the R squared value here up at the top, that's telling you based on this line, how well do the points fit that line? And so the higher this is, 1 is the maximum. If it was a 1, it would be like all of the points would line up exactly on this line. And it would be a perfect fit. But if it's 0, then it's terrible. It's totally random.
Yeah.
Although, in ecology, it's kind of messy. There's a lot of variation. So we would consider anything that's like a 0.3 or above is pretty good. It's kind of like a, I don't know, rough estimate. So 0.14 is not terrible, but it's not like a very definite relationship.
Okay, that's the R squared. Okay.
Yeah. And another thing you can do is, let's say, we have all these fall flowering onsets here that are probably, they really happened. I'm not saying they're an error, but if we're asking a question about, something to do with climate and kind of that first flowering that happened, we probably would want to restrict it. So you can actually do that with this slider. And you can remove and say, I actually only really care about anything from the first half of the year. I want to see all the flowers that happened from January 1st to June, the end of June.
Okay.
And throw out the rest. And then we can see again how the points kind of fit this line. It's actually worse. So yeah, I think it might be more helpful. That was just kind of an orientation to like all the buttons and everything. But I think it's the most helpful if you think about a question that you have about the relationship between climate and phenology, and then you kind of like ask it, of the tool. So what would be something that you would wonder, maybe a hypothesis that you'd have about what would impact flowering of desert willows? Do you think it's temperature or precipitation?
I think.
So we can pick for temperature, we have the choice between looking at the maximum temperature or the minimum. And then we also have, the different seasons. So typically desert willows, they're blooming in April, I think March, April. So what do you think would be a good season to look at if we're going to think about temperature?
It would be spring then, I would think.
Yeah. So spring again is, so we have, let's see, winter is December, January, February. And then spring's going to be March, April, May. So I think we could probably look at either of those. But yeah, let's start with spring. We can start with max temp here. So this is going to tell us, is there a relationship between the onset of open flowers in desert willow and that spring's maximum temperature, the average across the spring? And so what is this saying? This is saying in years where you had a hotter spring, the onset was earlier.
Yeah, that line fits pretty good.
Yeah, that 0.26 is pretty good. You can see there are some outliers here. If we
Uh-huh.
wanted to say like, we don't know what's going on with these points, maybe it was an error or something. Wouldn't necessarily expect to see open flowers of desert willow in February or January. Maybe we could say like, let's not look at those. Let's throw those out. And then we actually get an even better relationship. So this allows you to kind of throw out some of the outliers that are on the extreme edges because they don't really fit within the question we're asking. We want to know, that typical flowering timing of desert willow, how does that compare to the seasonal spring temperature average for the maximum temperature? So yeah, it's not too surprising, right? It's kind of what you would expect, that in the years where you had a spring that was warmer, then you had earlier onset of open flowers. So we can also look at the winter too, to see if maybe the winter temp had something to do with it. Those are the months where it would be before the flowering started, but it might have an impact on when the buds are starting to form. And we could also, if we wanted to change it, to look at flower buds, we can do that over here. So yeah, we can keep exploring and looking at the different temperatures. And you can always mess around with these two to bring in some of those points. If you wanted it, maybe with flower buds, you would think some of them might be earlier than the open flowers.
Yeah.
So yeah, any questions about this?
No, I really like that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so see if there's anything else to talk about here.
So to get to this, I just go to the NPN USA .org.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it kind of depends. If you want to look at your own data that you're recording for your local phenology program, I would recommend going to the Nature's Notebook website and then the 4 groups menu here, and then the active local phenology programs. And then you can find your group in the list. So which one did you want to look at? The Master Gardeners?
Yeah.
So you can try to just search by the name. So it's here in the list. And so if you, this is a little accordion, if you expand it, then you get this link here. And so this link is a customized link that we have for each of the local phenology programs. And when you click on it, you get into the tool, but there's like a filter set to only show your local phenology programs data. And so you still have to pick, you want to go with the scatter plot if you're looking at the climate data. And then you can see right here, it shows that there's a filter. So you're only looking at your phenology group.
How do you know there's a filter?
It's do you see this orange bar here?
Oh,
So that's showing that it's your group. It also is in the URL here. You could always bookmark this if you want to get back to it. And see this is your group ID. And so that's what the link is saying. That's how it's telling the visualization tool to show the filter. So if you want to bookmark this URL, you can keep coming back to this with the filter. And then the other way you can get into here, let's see, let me go back to the Nature's Notebook website. Another way to get into the tool, if you forget about this link here, is let's see, go to your observation deck. And then you go to one of your local phenology programs where you are an administrator, and you go to the manage users page. That link there on the bottom. And then if you want to go to this link here that says visualize group data, that's going to be that same link into the visualization tool. So it'll show your group. So this one's going to be a different group ID because it's one of mine. But if I chose scatterplot, then you can see my group is the NCO.
Okay.
So those are 2 ways to get into the tool with your group set. And then
Okay.
once you're in here with the Master Gardener Phenology Group filter, then you would go through the same steps. You don't have to pick anything for the map because you already have your filter. Then you go through and you pick the years again. You could go just to these. And then you get to the point where you pick your species.
Okay.
A nice thing about this is, sorry, this thing always comes up with the autofill. Oh boy. So it should come up with, oh, maybe, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's coming up with a species list, and I'm not sure why that is. You guys have entered data, right?
Yes.
Maybe, was it only this year though?
Yes.
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is not going to
Oh,
work for
yeah.
you. We don't have the climate data.
That's true.
But yeah, if you had data, or say we're doing this next year, you would
Uh-huh.
have 2021. And then for this would come up with your list of species. And actually it's nice because it orders it by the ones that you have the most data for at the top of the list. So you
Okay.
can see. So if we take this off, then we can go back and look at, this is all the species that we have data for now. So we took off the filter. And so these are actually ranked by, this is so annoying that it keeps doing that. You can kind of see it behind this, but it goes through and has the one, so red maple is the most observed species in the database, followed by sugar maple, tulip tree, down to the least observed at the bottom. So it can help you kind of decide like what to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions?
Well, I'm sure I'll have some after I try to use it, but I'll email you if I do, but I don't have any right now, Erin.
Okay. Yeah, so just things to keep in mind, there are the limitations on the years that we have this for. So yeah,
Okay.
for a group that just started, you wouldn't be able to really explore this for your own data until next year, but you can always look at, not just your group's data, but everyone's data if you're interested in the same species that you're monitoring, and start to look at the patterns. And then we didn't go over this yet, but if you did want to really explore, the data that we were looking at here, you can export the data. So if you click on that link on the left there, you get into have you seen the Phenology observation portal? So this is a tool. It's basically a way to get a data file in a spreadsheet. And if you do this link, the one I just clicked on was this here, export data on the left in the tool. It'll preload all the things that you were looking at from the Viz tool into here. So you can see that you have this date range was already set, you have your precision set, and we have desert willow, our filters. And then you pick a data type again. So we went over those. This is the raw data, the individual phenometrics, which is that onset, the site phenometrics, magnitude, you can pick whichever one you want.
Okay.
And then once you pick your data type, you can actually add on the climate fields if you want as well. So I actually downloaded one before this that I'll show. So this is the desert willow data. So you can see this is which one is this? So this is a summarized data type. It's the individual phenometrics data type. So instead of giving us a row for each yes, yes, no, no in the database, it gives us the onset. So if we go over here, let's just go through all of them actually. So we have our site ID, the lat and long of your site, the elevation of your site, the state. This is the identifier for the desert willow, genus, species, common name, the kingdom that it's in. This is an identifier for the individual desert willow that you registered at your site. So each of those gets an ID. The phenophase ID is a identifier for this phenophase. So in this case, falling leaves is 471. We have this is the year that we're looking at. And then this next information is about the onset. So this is the month, the day, and then the years before it. So this onset for falling leaves occurred on December 13th in 2020.
Okay.
We also give the day of year. So that's putting it, across 1 to 365. Which day of year does December 13th fall on? The Julian date is a way to look at dates where you can go across multiple years. So it starts from a long, long time ago. And that's really a way, if you have a value that's you want to look at across multiple years. So you don't want to restrict it to a single year. Maybe you're looking at, so like California uses water years sometimes, where instead of using January to December, they're thinking about it on a like October to September time scale. This would allow you to do like different calculations across the January 1st span. And then this is that number of days since prior no. So this is, you know, based on your onset, how many days was it since you last said no? And in this case, it was 50. There's some more precise ones here where it was only 6 days. Those are pretty good. And then this -9999 here, that means there wasn't one. So this would be a yes that didn't have a preceding no. Oops. All right, and then this is your end date. So the, you know, the opposite of the onset. This is the last day, or last month and day and year. So December 17th, 2020, that day of year value, the Julian date. And then how many days until the next no after that last yes.
Okay.
So this one didn't have one, but there were other ones like this one that it only had 6 days since the prior no before that onset. It had only 4 days until the last, the no after the last yes.
So that's more precise.
Yeah, exactly. And then this is where the those optional data fields that I added on, that's where this starts. So this gives you the accumulated growing degree days, the Tmax winter, all these seasonal temperatures that we wanted, and the precipitation amounts, and this is the accumulated precip against or from the beginning of the year, from January 1st. So all of those get added as separate fields. And again, these are tied to the lat long of your site. So we pull in the DayMet data that are associated with the pixel where your lat long falls. We like bring those in, we calculate the averages, and then put them in your data file for you.
That's amazing. That's a lot of data.
It is. So yeah, if you kind of got an idea in the Biz tool of like, oh, maybe there's a relationship between the spring maximum temperature and the open flowers onset. I want to really do some analysis of that. You know, if you wanted to do that, you could pull down a data file and actually do some sort of a statistical test using the data here.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I know that was a lot. So,
But I'm going to work on it and see how I do. So thank you very much, Erin.
yeah, of course. And yeah, so I will post this recording too on the website in case you want to review it, and then
yeah, I can listen to it again if I have problems.
great. All right. Well, thanks so much
All right.
for
Thank
joining.
you.
Yeah.
Great
I'll
to see
talk to you later.
you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.